The chrome-plated door handle, once pristine in their old mansion, now sat tarnished in a cardboard box at James Mwanga's feet. 5 years ago, it had been the first thing guests would touch when entering their 3-story home in Kilaleshwa. Now, in a single room in Eastlands, it was just another reminder of how far they had fallen. Through the room's sole window, streaks of setting sun painted shadows across 7 mattresses, arranged like puzzle pieces on the floor. Elizabeth, his wife, sat at the edge of one, still in her pajamas, grading papers by the dying light. The sound of their youngest daughters playing school with torn textbook pages filled the heavy air. "Baba Kwe." Elizabeth's voice was soft but carried the weight of unpaid bills. "The Sacco loan, they rejected it, said we still have 3 months left on the previous one." James watched his eldest daughter Kwe, pretending to do homework in the corner. Her shoulders were tight, ears straining to catch every word. At 15, she understood too much. The wrinkled envelope from her school lay unopened on the table, but they all knew what it contained, another fee demand. His son Kevin, 12, lay facing the wall, earphones plugged in, probably not even playing any music. Their electricity tokens had run out yesterday. The boy had stopped meeting his eyes since they'd moved here, ashamed perhaps of seeing his father's own shame reflected back. That morning, James had stood for 3 hours outside his former office building, his once crisp suit now shiny at the elbows, waiting to beg for his old position. Security hadn't even let him past the lobby. "Company policy on retrenched employees," they'd said, not meeting his eyes. Now, as darkness crept into their single room, James pulled out his phone and typed a message to his old university friend, Chinedu. They hadn't spoken in years, but desperate times. The response came quickly. "Come over tonight. Might have something for you." The taxi ride to Chinedu's palatial Karen home cost him their food money for the next day. As the security guard waved him through the automatic gates, James noticed unusual movement in the shadows. Before he could process what was happening, floodlights burst to life, and armed police swarmed from every direction. In the chaos that followed, James found himself face down on manicured grass, hands zip-tied behind his back. Through the ringing in his ears, he caught fragments of radio chatter. Major drug trafficking operation. Months of surveillance. All suspects in custody. The police van, watching Chinedu being led away in handcuffs, James thought of Kwe's school fees envelope, of Elizabeth's tired eyes, of Kevin's turned back, of chrome door handles and fallen grace. And he wondered, as the van pulled away into the darkness, how many more fathers like him were out there tonight, one desperate decision away from losing everything. Before the police raid, the guard had directed James through a maze of manicured hedges toward Chinedu's house. String lights twinkled in the perfectly trimmed acacia trees, and the gentle splash of a fountain provided a soothing backdrop to what felt like entering another world. This was the kind of life James used to know. Chinedu met him at the door, arms spread wide. "My old friend! Come inside!" His silk kaftan rustled as he moved, gold rings catching the light. The years had been kind to him. His face was fuller, his smile wider, though something tense lurked behind his eyes. The house smelled of expensive incense and something else James couldn't quite place. In the vast living room, crystal glasses sat half empty on the coffee table, and a laptop showed rows of numbers before Chinedu quickly closed it. Modern art pieces worth more than James's annual salary once adorned the walls, but some were oddly askew, as if they'd been hastily straightened. Sit, Chinedu gestured to a leather armchair. "Whiskey?" "The good kind. 18 years old." He was already pouring before James could answer. "I appreciate this, Chinedu, but about that opportunity you mentioned," James began, but Chinedu cut him off with a wave. "Business comes after drinks, my friend. Tell me about your family first. How many children now?" His words were warm, but his eyes kept darting to his phone, which buzzed incessantly. A door clicked somewhere in the house and Chinedu's head snapped toward the sound. "Just the house staff," he said quickly, though James hadn't asked. There was movement upstairs, Footsteps, whispered voices. Chinedu's phone buzzed again. This time his face darkened as he read the message. "Actually, my friend," he said, standing abruptly. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my study." He glanced at his watch, then the window. More private there. But before they could move, a sharp metallic sound cut through the night. The unmistakable sound of a gate being breached. Chinedu's face went ash-grey, and then the floodlights came on. The guard's flashlight beam led James along a cobblestone path that wound through perfectly manicured gardens. A security camera tracked his movement, its red light blinking steadily. The air carried the sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine, mixed with something sharper, chemical. Perhaps pool chlorine, James thought. Through tall windows, he caught glimpses of what seemed like a movie set. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, gilt-framed mirrors. A group of men in expensive suits hurried past one window, their faces grim. None looked like the smiling students he remembered from university days. Chinedu answered the door himself, though James spotted at least 3 household staff hovering in the background. "James Mwanga. My brother from another mother." The embrace was quick, almost perfunctory. Chinedu's designer kaftan couldn't hide his tension. His shoulders were tight as bridge cables. The living room was a cathedral to wealth. Soaring ceilings, art pieces that probably cost more than James's old house, leather furniture that still smelled new. But there were oddities. A drawer left slightly open revealed stacks of rubber-banded cash. A wall safe stood ajar. Tablets on the coffee table displayed what looked like surveillance feeds. "You've done well," James said, perching awkwardly on a leather armchair that probably cost 6 months of Elizabeth's salary. His old shoes left scuff marks on the marble floor that he tried to rub away with his heel. "God has blessed me," Chinedu replied automatically, pouring Macallan whiskey with slightly shaking hands. "But enough about me. You said things are difficult?" His eyes kept darting to a large mirror on the wall. James realized it was positioned to show the driveway. From upstairs came the sound of rapid footsteps and harsh whispers in a language James didn't recognize. A door slammed. Chinedu's phone buzzed for the 4th time in as many minutes. "Just business associates," Chinedu said, though James hadn't asked. "Moving product, you know how it is." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The phone buzzed again. This time, Chinedu's face went pale as he read the message. A security guard appeared at the doorway, his face tight. "Sir, not now," Chinedu snapped, but the guard persisted. "Sir, the cameras on the east side have gone dark." Chinedu stood so quickly his whiskey glass toppled, amber liquid seeping into the white carpet. In the distance, dogs began to bark. Car doors slammed, multiple and simultaneous. "James," Chinedu said, his voice suddenly cold and businesslike, "I'm afraid you've come at a very bad time." He reached for something under his kaftan. A very bad time indeed. The first flash of police lights painted the room in surreal blues and reds. James heard the gate crash open, heavy boots on gravel, shouted commands. In that frozen moment, he saw his whole life crystallize. Elizabeth grading papers by lamplight. Qui's unopened school fee envelope. Kevin's turned back. All their hopes and dreams reduced to this one terrible mistake. Then the floodlights came on, bright as midday, and the world exploded into chaos. The first thing James noticed was that Chinedu's business associates moved like ghosts through the upper floors. Through the open-plan layout, he caught glimpses. Men in tailored suits speaking rapid Mandarin, women in sleek dresses carrying metal briefcases, a tall Nigerian man with tribal scars barking orders into 3 phones simultaneously. They moved with practiced efficiency, like dancers in a choreographed performance. The air was thick with tension and expensive cologne. A cleaning lady hurriedly wiped down surfaces with bleach, her eyes downcast. In the kitchen, someone was shredding documents, the mechanical whir a constant backdrop. James's stomach churned. 5 years ago, he would have walked out immediately. But now, he thought of this morning. Kui's brave attempt at a smile as she handed him the school fees notice. His daughter had grown so thin lately, her uniform hanging loose where it once fit perfectly. She'd started skipping meals, claiming she wasn't hungry, but he'd seen her giving her portions to her younger siblings. Through the second-floor railing, James spotted a man methodically removing paintings from the walls, revealing a hidden safe behind each. The safes were being emptied, their contents transferred to matte black briefcases. Everything about the scene screamed danger, but all James could think about was Kevin's face last night, illuminated by his phone's flashlight as he tried to finish his homework after the electricity tokens ran out. "Just some end-of-quarter accounting," Chinedu said smoothly, following James's gaze, but his friend's manicured hands couldn't stop fidgeting with his gold rings, turning them round and round. A sharp crack from upstairs made everyone freeze. Something heavy had fallen. A woman cursed in Russian, followed by the distinct sound of breaking glass. James watched a fine white powder drift down from the ceiling fan above, catching light like diamond dust. Elizabeth's voice echoed in his head. "We'll find another way, James." "We always do." But they hadn't, had they? Every door had closed. The bank loans, his old job, even her teacher's sacco. Their children were watching them fail in slow motion. Movement on the upper floor grew more frantic. Someone was pulling down hard drives, yanking cables free. Another was furiously typing on a laptop, lines of code reflecting in his wire-rimmed glasses. A third rushed past with stacks of phones, dropping them into a bucket of what smelled like salt water. James recognized the signs of a drowning man. He saw one in the mirror every morning. But Chinedu was drowning in luxury, while James's family was drowning in poverty. The irony wasn't lost on him. Standing in Chinedu's marble-floored foyer, James felt the weight of his worn shoes. He remembered the frayed cuffs of his once expensive suit. The grand chandelier above reminded him of the one Elizabeth had loved in their old home, though theirs had been smaller. Its crystal drops had cast the same dancing rainbows across their walls during Sunday family lunches. Those lunches. Just 1 year ago, they had been a tradition. James would grill nyama choma in their lush backyard, the smell of roasting meat and aromatic spices drawing the children from their rooms. Elizabeth would lay out her special china, wedding gifts they'd had to sell last month. Kevin, still proud to be his father's son then, would help him with the meat, learning the secret to perfect timing. The girls would set the table on their wraparound veranda, arguing playfully about who got to use the fancy napkin rings. Now, watching Chinedu's staff rush past with evidence of their illegal activities, James remembered how his own house staff, just 2 but loyal for years, had cried when he had to let them go. Mary, their cook, had tried to offer them her savings. Samuel, their gardener, had begged to work for free until things improved. His eyes caught on a family portrait hanging in Chinedu's hallway from way back when his family was young, perfectly posed, professionally lit. Last Christmas, the Mwangas hadn't even been able to afford a family photo. Instead, they'd gathered around Elizabeth's phone, trying to fit everyone into a selfie. The youngest had been crying because they couldn't afford new Christmas dresses like their cousins had. Kui, his firstborn, had worn her mother's old dress, taken in at the seams. She'd smiled bravely, but James had seen her tears later that night. The sound of bubbling water from Chinedu's elaborate fountain triggered another memory. The children's pool in their old garden. Every weekend, the neighborhood kids would gather there, their laughter echoing off the walls. His youngest would proudly show off her improving swimming skills, while Kevin taught the younger ones to float. Now the children spent weekends in their single room, trying to study by turns because they only had one working lamp. A whiff of bleach from the cleaning lady's frantic scrubbing transported him to his old office, that corner suite with its view of Nairobi's skyline. He'd had an executive bathroom with marble countertops, not unlike Chinedu's. His secretary would bring him fresh coffee every morning in a proper cup and saucer, not like the chipped mug he now shared with Elizabeth. James had been the youngest chief financial officer at Standard Bank's East African division. His office on the 15th floor had been a testament to his meteoric rise. Degrees from London School of Economics proudly displayed, awards for financial innovation lined up precisely, the corner view of Nairobi's skyline serving as a daily reminder of his achievements. His team of 30 had handled billions in transactions, and his signature could move markets. The first signs of trouble came in whispers, merger rumours, restructuring murmurs. James had dismissed them, secure in his position. Even when the international consultants arrived with their laptops and their efficiency matrices, he'd believed his track record would protect him. The retrenchment letter had come on a Tuesday, printed on the same premium paper he'd once used for his quarterly reports. Kevin's transformation had been the most dramatic. Once the star footballer at the international school, now he shuffled through the corridors of his new public school, shoulders hunched against his classmates' whispers. His old teammates' mothers had stopped inviting him for playdates. The football boots James had promised for his birthday remained an impossible dream. Elizabeth is the family anchor who had been the miracle in their collapse. Her transformation from corporate wife to family survivor had been remarkable. The woman who once organised charity galas now bargained fiercely in Wakulima Market, stretching her teacher's salary beyond possibility. She'd learned to turn one meal into 3, to make school uniforms last twice their normal life, to find dignity in the most undignified circumstances. Her fellow teachers didn't know she spent her lunch breaks doing other teachers' paperwork for extra money. Her students never guessed that their always elegantly dressed English teacher washed and ironed her 3 remaining outfits nightly. She'd developed a talent for creative accounting that would have impressed James's former banking colleagues, robbing Peter to pay Paul, juggling debts like a street performer. Now, standing in Chinedu's house of ill-gotten wealth, James felt the full weight of their descent. Each frantic movement of the criminals upstairs, each sweep of the cleaning lady's bleach-soaked cloth, seemed to echo their own downward spiral. They'd gone from having 3 cars to sharing matatus, from hosting dinner parties to sharing communal toilets, from planning overseas holidays to planning which bill could be postponed longest. Just that morning, he'd walked 2 kilometres to save the bus fare, his worn shoes letting in water from the puddles. He'd stood outside his old office building for 3 hours, swallowing his pride, only to be turned away by guards who used to salute him. And now here he was, watching drug money being packed into briefcases, wondering if this was his last chance to save his family. Kevin's first day at Umoja Junior Secondary had been a study in humiliation. His new classmates had spotted his Braeburn accent immediately. Mama yao anaongjia, kizungu, they'd mocked, until he learned to swallow his words, to hide his perfect English beneath carefully practiced slang. His old school blazer, still bearing the prestigious international school crest, had disappeared while moving houses. He'd come home in a borrowed shirt, eyes downcast after someone stole his new uniform after swimming and never mentioned swimming again. Kui's transition had been different, but no less painful. At her new school, her previous straight-A record had become a target. Huyu anafikiri ako Harvard, girls would whisper as she raised her hand in class. But it was the small humiliations that cut deepest. Having to borrow sanitary pads from the school nurse, watching her friend's WhatsApp group fade into silence because she could no longer afford a smartphone, declining birthday party invitations because she had nothing nice to wear. The twins, Jane and Joy, had developed a secret language to cope with their new reality. In their private vocabulary, star-watching meant studying by streetlight, princess clothes were hand-me-downs, and royal feast was their code for the end-month meal when Elizabeth could afford a little meat. Their teachers noticed they never separated, sharing one chair at lunch, splitting one composition book between them, defending each other fiercely on the playground. Little Grace, perhaps too young to fully grasp their decline, had become the family's unwitting truth-teller. "Teacher asked us to draw our house today," she'd announce, producing pictures of their old mansion. "I told her we have a bigger one, but we're just visiting this small room for now." Her innocence made the adults cry when she wasn't looking. Elizabeth's day began at 4 a.m., cooking githeri in bulk to last several days. She'd discovered that adding food colour to the maize and beans made it look different each day, helping the children believe they were eating varied meals. Her salary was an intricate puzzle: 30% to rent, 40% to school fee instalments, 20% to food, leaving 10% for everything else, including the diabetes medication she secretly skipped every other day. She'd developed a network of silent allies. Mama Mboga would slip extra vegetables into her shopping, pretending to miscount. The uniform shop owner would find slightly damaged pieces she could mend. The compound security guard would save newspapers and magazines for the children's homework projects. Even the matatu conductor on her regular route would sometimes forget to collect her fare, though she insisted on paying double the next day. At school, she'd become a master of misdirection. She joined every committee that offered an extra allowance, volunteered for every paid supervision duty. During parents' meetings, she'd position herself strategically near the door, ready to step out if she encountered anyone from their old social circle. Her biggest triumph was keeping her own students from ever suspecting, maintaining an image of professional dignity that cost her endless hours of washing and ironing. Their fall from grace had revealed the true colours of their social circle. Former dinner party guests crossed the street to avoid conversation. School WhatsApp groups mysteriously removed Elizabeth's number. Christmas cards stopped arriving. Their church, where James had once chaired the finance committee, suddenly had no seats available at their regular pew. But new unexpected allies emerged from the shadows of their descent. Their current neighbours, despite having so little themselves, proved generous in silent ways. Mama Irene from next door would come with groceries from her farm and share it with Elizabeth, while her children would enjoy ugali in her house, sending her children to share the excess with other neighbours. Mzee Kiari, the retired teacher from across the compound, offered free tutoring to the children, accepting only tea as payment. Even the local duka owner, Mr. Otieno, extended credit without being asked, carefully noting down each debt without mentioning repayment. The contrast was starkest at school events. Their children learned to navigate two worlds: the old one, where former friends now ignored them, and the new one, where classmates from similar circumstances shared their lunch without comment. The twins' new best friend was a girl who'd never known wealth but understood hunger. She taught them how to make rubber bands last longer for hair ties. The activity upstairs at Chinedu's house grew more frenzied. Through the crystal chandelier's prisms, James watched shadows dart across the upper landing. Men in expensive suits now moving with less precision, more panic. The sound of shredding papers had become constant, like angry wasps. A new figure appeared at the top of the stairs, a Middle Eastern man in a white linen suit, his face hard as carved stone. He carried a metal briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. "Time," he barked. His accent was thick with urgency. 20 minutes, Chinedu replied, but his Rolex said otherwise. James recognized the tell from their university poker games. Chinedu's left eye twitched when he lied. The man in white disappeared back upstairs, his footsteps sharp against marble. The cleaning lady's bleach couldn't mask another smell now. Something burning. Electronic components, James guessed, remembering the smell from his banking days when they'd destroy sensitive hardware. A thin haze of smoke drifted down the stairs, making the chandelier lights dance like evil stars. Chinedu's phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't even try to hide his reaction. "James," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I'm going to make you an offer, one time only. There's a bag in my study. Take it to an address in Westlands. Just a bag, old friend. Enough money in it to put all your children through school. Private school." The words hit James like physical blows. Private school. Koi could return to her friends. Kevin could play football again. The twins could stop sharing textbooks. Grace could draw real houses again, not memories. Something crashed upstairs, breaking glass, cursing in Russian. The man in the white suit appeared again, now without his briefcase. His eyes met James's, cold and calculating. Behind him, a woman in a red dress was purposefully smashing phones with a hammer, each crack like a gunshot, in the marble halls. "Think fast, my friend," Chinedu said, reaching for the study door. "Some choices only come once." But as Chinedu turned the handle, James saw something through the window. A brief flash of movement in the perfectly manicured garden. A shadow where no shadow should be. The faintest glint of metal. Time seemed to slow. In that frozen moment, James saw two futures with perfect clarity. The decision crystallized in his mind just as the first police floodlight illuminated the room. In that blinding moment, James saw his reflection in Chinedu's mirror one last time, not as the broken man he'd become, but as the father his children deserved. The next few seconds exploded in chaos. The front door burst open with a sound like thunder. Black-clad figures swarmed through every entrance. Someone screamed upstairs. The chandelier light caught the metal of raised weapons. The first flashbang grenade turned the world white. It punched through the front window in a shower of crystal, spinning like a malevolent star. Time stretched like taffy as James watched it arc through the chandelier light. His banking days had taught him to read moments of impact before they happened. Market crashes, currency collapses. This was no different. The explosion hit like a physical blow. The chandelier chimed a discordant song as its crystals shuddered. Upstairs, someone screamed in Mandarin. The sound of breaking glass cascaded through the house like falling dominoes. They came through every entrance simultaneously. Front door, back door, French windows, all exploding inward in choreographed violence. Black-clad figures moved with practiced precision, their weapons sweeping arcs of authority. Red laser sights danced across the imported wallpaper like deadly fireflies. The commands came in multiple languages: Swahili, English, Arabic, Igbo, each syllable punctuated by boots on marble. The smell of cordite mixed with Chinedu's expensive cologne and the cleaning lady's bleach, creating a nauseous cocktail of chaos. As James dropped to the floor, cheek pressed against cold marble, his mind accelerated through a lifetime of memories. Elizabeth that morning, pretending the tea was just how she liked it, though they hadn't been able to afford milk for weeks, her brave smile as she'd straightened his tie, the same tie he now felt tightening around his neck like a noose. Kui's face when she'd been sent home for school fees yesterday. She'd waited 3 bus stops before calling, not wanting to disturb him at what she thought was work. She'd walked home in the rain to save the fare. Kevin's football trophy, carefully wrapped in newspaper at the bottom of their shared wardrobe. He still polished it every Sunday, though he hadn't played in months. The twins sharing a single pencil in class, breaking it perfectly in half with the precision of long practice. Little Grace's latest drawing, their family floating above their single room, held up by what she called hope balloons. Time reasserted itself with brutal efficiency. Boots surrounded him. Someone was zip-tying his hands. Above him, Chinedu was being pressed against his own pristine wall, his silk kaftan ripped at the shoulder. The man in the white linen suit was face down nearby, a police officer's knee in his back. "James Mwanga," a voice read from somewhere above him. "You are under arrest for suspicion of involvement in a criminal enterprise." The words washed over him like cold rain. All he could think about was tomorrow morning, when his children would wake up to find their father gone. Would Elizabeth still straighten her back and say they would rise again? Would Kui understand why he'd been at this house? Would Kevin ever feel proud of him again? The marble floor began to blur beneath his face. It took him a moment to realize he was crying, not for himself, but for the simple dream of seeing his children grow up whole and happy. As they lifted him to his feet, he caught one final glimpse of his reflection in Chinedu's shattered mirror. A man who'd tried to outrun poverty and had instead run straight into prison. The marble floor of Chinedu's mansion became a processing centre. Police officers photographed each suspect where they lay, evidence tags appearing like deadly flowers around them. James watched as they documented everything. His worn shoes, his frayed red shirt and trousers, his empty wallet with its faded family photo. Name! The officer was young, probably fresh from training. His notebook was crisp, pages still square-cornered. James Mwanga. Occupation. Former chief financial officer. He stopped, swallowed, unemployed. Nearby, Chinedu was speaking rapidly in multiple languages, names spilling from him like water. The man in the white suit maintained his silence, even as officers catalogued the powder residue on his sleeves. The woman in red had started crying, her mascara creating black rivers down her cheeks. They led the suspects out one by one. Each step through Chinedu's perfect garden felt like walking through quicksand. The beautiful flowers Elizabeth would have loved now seemed to mock him. The fountain's gentle splash sounded like his children crying. The neighbours had gathered, faces pressed against gates, phones recording everything. James recognised some of them from his banking days. Their expressions mixed shock and schadenfreude. Tomorrow his arrest would be neighbourhood gossip shared over the same fancy coffee he used to drink. At the police van, reality struck with handcuff clarity. A reporter had already arrived, her camera flash turning the night into stark snapshots of shame. James turned his face away, but not before recognising her. She'd covered his promotion to CFO years ago. Her eyes showed she remembered too. In the van, the metal bench cold beneath him, James finally broke. Not in loud sobs or dramatic gestures, but in the quiet realisation of what would happen next. Elizabeth would wait up, growing increasingly worried. The children would wake to confusion. The school fees would remain unpaid. Their single room's rent would come due with no one to negotiate extensions. His job applications would go unanswered. Their last shreds of dignity would dissolve in the acid of his arrest. The van started moving. Through its small window, James watched Chinedu's mansion recede, its perfect lines now broken by police tape. The fountain still played its gentle song, ignorant of how many lives had just been destroyed by its waters. As they turned onto the main road, the first hints of dawn painted the sky in cruel pastels. Somewhere across the city, his family slept, unaware that their world was about to change again. James closed his eyes but couldn't escape the image of Elizabeth's face when she would hear the news, or Kui's expression when her classmates inevitably found out. The police van hit a pothole, jolting its occupants. The woman in red had stopped crying, now staring blankly ahead. Chinedu had fallen silent, his gold rings catching the early light. The man in white appeared to be praying. James thought of his children's morning routine, how they would wake up, put on their carefully maintained uniforms, and step into a world that had changed overnight. How would they face their classmates? What would Elizabeth tell the school administrators? How long before the landlord started asking questions? The van started moving. Through its small window, James watched Chinedu's mansion recede, its perfect lines now broken by police tape. The fountain still played its gentle song, ignorant of how many lives had just been destroyed by its waters. The police station's phone was old, its cord frayed, numbers worn nearly smooth from countless desperate calls. James stared at it for a long moment, his handcuffed hands hovering over the keypad. An officer waited impassively behind him, stopwatch ready. 3 minutes, he reminded James. How do you compress a lifetime of love and regret into 3 minutes? The phone rang 4 times. Each ring was a heartbeat, a chance to prepare words that could never be adequate. Hello? Elizabeth's voice was taut with worry, layered with exhaustion. The background noise told him she was already at school. She would have left home an hour ago, putting on her brave face for another day. Elizabeth. His voice cracked on her name. The background noise ceased immediately. She must have stepped away from the staff room. James? What's wrong? Where are you? I've been so worried. You didn't come home. Listen carefully, my love. He could hear her sharp intake of breath at his tone. I'm at Central Police Station. There's been... He swallowed hard. I was at Chinedu's house when it was raided. They arrested everyone present. Elizabeth had known something was wrong when she woke to find James's side of the mattress untouched. Their youngest had stirred, mumbling, "Where's Baba?" She'd maintained normalcy with military precision, woken the children, overseen uniform inspection, divided the last bread between 5 lunchboxes. She'd plaited the girl's hair while reciting English verbs, checked Kevin's math homework, and reminded Kui about her library books. Now in the school corridor, her world collapsed in slow motion. "Drug raid," she heard James say, his voice distant through the roaring in her ears. "Chinedu, trafficking, I didn't know." The morning assembly bell rang, its familiar chime now somehow sinister. Through the window she could see her Class 4B lining up, notebooks ready for her English lesson on past perfect tense. How perfect their past had been, how imperfect their present. "The children," she managed to say. "What do I tell the children?" "I'm so sorry," James whispered, the officer's voice in the background. "1 minute." Elizabeth straightened her back, the same motion she'd made through every crisis. "Listen to me, James Mwanga. We are not finished. You hear me? We are not finished." But after hanging up, in the private space of the school's storage closet, Elizabeth finally allowed herself 10 seconds of tears. Then she dried her eyes, reapplied her carefully maintained lipstick, and stepped out to teach past perfect tense to Class 4B. As if her own past hadn't just crumbled to dust. Her lesson that day was about completed actions in the past. On the blackboard, she wrote with steady hands, "Before everything changed, we had..." Elizabeth had never called in sick before. Her perfect attendance was part of her armour of dignity, but now she stood before the headmistress, her voice steady even as her world shook. "A family emergency," was all she said. The headmistress's eyes softened with concern, but Elizabeth was already turning away. She couldn't bear kindness. Not today. She counted her money 3 times at the staff room door. Bus fare to Central Police Station would take half of what they had left for the week, but Matatus would mean more time, and time was bleeding away fast. "I can cover your afternoon classes," Purity, the geography teacher, offered. Elizabeth hadn't realised she'd spoken her calculations aloud. She managed a nod of thanks, not trusting her voice. Central Police Station squatted like a colonial ghost, its walls yellow with age and authority. Elizabeth paid the taxi driver with carefully counted notes, ignoring his sympathetic glance. Her heels clicked on the cracked pavement, the same shoes she'd worn to parents' meetings and church, now carrying her into a different world entirely. The station's reception area smelled of disinfectant and despair. Women in expensive clothes sat next to women in tears, all waiting. Elizabeth recognised some faces from their old social circle. Their eyes met, then darted away. News travelled fast in their former world. She approached the desk, back straight as if facing a classroom of unruly students. "I'm here to see James Mwanga." Her voice didn't waver. The officer barely looked up, pushing a form toward her. As she filled it out, her teacher's handwriting perfectly neat, Elizabeth became aware of whispers behind her. She recognised voices from their old church, their old neighbourhood. Let them talk, she thought. We've survived worse. But in the harsh fluorescent light, Elizabeth's reflection in the glass partition showed what she fought to hide. The fear beneath her dignity, the exhaustion behind her strength, the worry lines that no carefully applied makeup could conceal. In a few hours, she would need to face their children, to explain why their father wasn't coming home, to hold together a family that kept being asked to survive the unsurvivable. The officer stamped her form with bureaucratic finality. "Waiting room 2, they'll call you." Elizabeth nodded, turned, walked past the whispers and stairs to the designated room. Only there, in the momentary privacy of a corner seat, did she allow herself to close her eyes. Not to cry. There would be time for that later, maybe, in the darkness of their single room after the children slept. No, this was a moment to gather strength, to prepare for whatever she would see in James's eyes. Elizabeth was searched before entering, her dignity passed through practiced hands, her teacher's bag examined, her lipstick scrutinised before being returned. When they brought James in, Elizabeth's carefully maintained composure cracked, just slightly. He had his red shirt and trousers with no belt on his feet. He had one shoe on one foot. But it was his eyes that hurt her most, hollow with a shame that cut deeper than their poverty ever had. "My love," she said, and those two words carried decades of shared struggle. "I can explain," James started, but Elizabeth shook her head. "The children are safe. That's what matters first." Her teacher's voice, the one that could calm rowdy classrooms. "Kai is helping the twins with homework. Kevin has football practice. I told him to go to keep things normal. Grace drew you a picture in class today." James's hands trembled on the table. Elizabeth wanted to reach for them, but the guard had been clear. No touching. Instead, she placed her hand on the table, palm up, inches from his. A bridge not quite built. "I didn't know about the drugs," he whispered. "Chinedu said there was an opportunity. I just went to talk. Elizabeth, the school fees—" "Stop." Her voice was gentle but firm. "We've survived retrenchment. We've survived eviction. We've survived hunger. We will survive this too." The fluorescent light buzzed above them like an angry insect. Outside the barred window, Nairobi traffic moved in endless streams. "I've failed you," James said. "Failed our children. Everything I touched turned to ash. And now you listen to me, James Mwanga." Elizabeth leaned forward, her voice dropping so only he could hear. "Remember when Kevin was born? The doctors said he wouldn't make it through the night. But I held him, and you held me, and we proved them wrong. Remember when we lost the house? Everyone said we'd break. But we held on. We always hold on." Tears slid down James's cheeks now. Elizabeth continued, her voice steady even as her heart broke. "I told my headmistress I have a family emergency. You know what she said? She said, 'Take all the time you need,' because in 5 years of teaching there, I've never once been late, never once called in sick. That's who we are, James. We don't break. We adapt. We survive." "The newspapers," he started. "Are tomorrow's garbage," she finished. "Our children are what matters, and they need their father to be strong now, stronger than shame, stronger than regret." The guard stepped forward. "Time's up." Elizabeth stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced grace. "I'll be back tomorrow. The children—" Her voice caught, just slightly. "The children send their love." As they led James away, he turned back one last time. "Elizabeth?" "I know," she said. "We'll rise again." The taxi was beyond their means now. Elizabeth walked to the matatu stage, each step measured and precise despite her trembling knees. Inside the crowded vehicle, pressed between a market woman with a basket of tomatoes and a young man playing music through his phone, she finally allowed herself to plan. Their rent was due in 3 days. The children's school fees loomed like gathering storms. James's arrest would be in tomorrow's papers. She would need to wake early, collect them all from their compound's gate before the children could see. The matatu lurched through traffic as the sun began its descent. Elizabeth watched Nairobi transform through the smudged window, office workers rushing home, street vendors packing up, the city preparing for the night. Her phone showed 4 missed calls from Kui. Even her eldest would have to wait a little longer. Elizabeth needed these precious minutes to rebuild her armor. At the compound gate, Elizabeth paused to compose herself. She could hear children playing in the central courtyard, the normal rhythm of life continuing despite their private catastrophe. From their single room's window, she saw the twins' faces appear and disappear. They were watching for her. She had prepared answers during the walk from the matatu stop. For Kui, "Your father is helping the police with an investigation. Yes, it's serious. No, we're not giving up." For Kevin, "This doesn't change who your father is. He made a mistake trying to help us. We'll face this together." For the twins, "Sometimes grown-ups get into trouble trying to fix things. Dad needs us to be strong right now." For Grace, "Daddy's going to be away for a while, but he still loves us very much." But rehearsed answers were like lesson plans. They rarely survived contact with reality. The cell was overcrowded, but James's red shirt and trousers, even wrinkled and stained, carved him a small space. He sat with his back against the cold wall, eyes closed, holding Elizabeth's words like a shield. "We'll rise again." Around him, the cell's ecosystem operated on its own rules. The man in the white suit from Chinedu's house sat in a corner, still silent, still regal despite circumstances. Chinedu himself had been moved elsewhere. A pickpocket tried to engage James in conversation but fell silent at James's unseeing stare. Night crept in through the high window. James thought of their single room, imagined Elizabeth gathering their children, and pictured the space where he should be sitting. His hands ached to help with homework, to pat Kevin's shoulder, to braid the twins' hair. In their single room, Elizabeth orchestrated their evening routine with tender efficiency. Homework was checked, uniforms were prepared for tomorrow, their last bread was shared. She answered questions with careful truth. Yes, Dad is in trouble. No, he didn't hurt anyone. Yes, we'll visit him. No, we won't have to move again. Quay helped her younger siblings but watched Elizabeth with knowing eyes. Kevin pretended to read but hadn't turned a page in an hour. The twins held hands beneath their shared blanket. Grace drew picture after picture of their family, each one showing James right there with them. In his cell, James lay awake, counting blessings instead of regrets. Elizabeth's strength, Quay's resilience, Kevin's hidden hope, the twins' unity, Grace's innocent faith. The night pressed in, but he held onto his wife's words, making them a prayer. "We'll rise again. We'll rise again. We'll rise again." Both lives paused, separated by circumstance but connected by love, waiting for dawn to begin their new normal. In both places, the crowded cell and the single room, the same thought echoed. "We'll rise again." Because they had to. Because they always had. Because love and hope and family were stronger than shame and poverty and prison walls. Quay entered her classroom first, head high like her mother taught her. The whispers started immediately. Her father's arrest was front-page news. Her phone, borrowed from a neighbour to coordinate studies, buzzed with messages from old friends who suddenly wanted to talk. She silenced it without looking. Kevin faced the football field with hollow eyes. His coach called him aside. "Your spot on the team is secure, son." The kindness almost broke him. During practice, he played with fierce desperation, as if each goal could erase a headline. The twins created a protective bubble around themselves. When a classmate mentioned the newspaper, Jane started reciting multiplication tables while Joy listed English vocabulary. Their teacher watched with understanding and assigned them seats by the window, away from curious eyes. Grace, too young to understand shame, proudly showed her teacher the card she'd made for her father. "He's helping the police," she explained to anyone who'd listen, like a superhero undercover. Her innocence was a blade that cut the adults around her. Beth sat perfectly straight in the worn office chair, her teacher's salary payslip on the lawyer's desk. Advocate Kamau, an old man with kind eyes, studied their case file over wire-rimmed glasses. "Drug trafficking charges are serious," he said gently. "But your husband's presence at the scene doesn't automatically imply involvement. We can work with that." The legal fees he quoted made Elizabeth's heart stop, but her voice remained steady. "We'll find a way." She left with a payment plan that would take years to fulfill and a sliver of hope that felt like a fortune. Advocate Kamau's office became Elizabeth's second classroom. She learned legal terms like she once taught vocabulary, breaking down complex concepts into digestible pieces. The evidence against James was circumstantial but substantial. His presence at the house, phone calls that couldn't be explained away. Their defense strategy emerged from hours of detailed reconstruction. James had been visiting his longtime friend, Chinedu, just a friends visiting each other, but he didn't know what was going on in his friend's house. He had just arrived to ask for a loan as they had earlier talked about on the phone. After being retrenched from managerial job at Standard Bank, things were hard, and as a man he was looking for a way out for his family. Chinedu had promised to loan him the money. James was at the right place, but at the wrong time. But prosecutors had a different narrative. James was the inside man, using his managerial position as cover. Each legitimate explanation felt fragile against their well-documented timeline of events. The judge's decision acknowledged both James's negligence and his manipulation by the real traffickers after witnessing everything was going on in that house that night he should have left. 5 years, with possibility of parole after 3 for good behaviour and cooperation. Not the vindication they'd hoped for, but not the decade-plus they'd feared. The years that followed taught them lessons no school could provide. For James, trust must be balanced with vigilance. Desperation makes easy targets. Integrity isn't just about being honest, but about asking honest questions. For Elizabeth, strength isn't about not breaking, but about how you piece yourself back together. Community reveals itself in crisis, both in abandonment and unexpected support. Children are more resilient when they're allowed to face truth with support for the children. Kai learned that reputation can be rebuilt. Leading her school's ethics club, Kevin discovered that determination could be fueled by more than anger. The twins found that unity doesn't require uniformity in grieving. Grace's innocent belief in her father's goodness helped preserve his spirit. For the community, quick judgments hurt more than help. Support matters more than speculation. Redemption stories need witnesses as much as participants. 3 years into James's sentence, Elizabeth received a call from the prison administrator. James had become a mentor to other inmates, teaching literacy classes and helping them reconnect with their families. His sentence reduction hearing was scheduled earlier than expected. The family had changed during his absence. They were stronger in some ways, scarred in others, but ultimately more aware of both their fragility and their resilience. Their old motto, "We'll rise again," had evolved from a hope to a reality they were actively building. Elizabeth kept a new journal now, alongside the old one hidden in her Bible. This one documented their victories: Kui's scholarship offers, Kevin's sports leadership award, the twins' academic achievements, Grace's unwavering compassion. These were the treasures they'd found in their darkest time. The proof that rising wasn't just about returning to where they'd been, but about discovering where they could go. James would return to a family that had learned to soar through storms. They had all paid the price for his unquestioning trust, but they had also learned the value of questioning everything except their love for each other. The end.